Okay, just a little last word about last week's share. We talked about what's in a comma. We spoke about different sections in the SIDDUR where it makes a world of a difference where you put the comma in the sentence and it has different meaning even. And we gave various examples. I'm not going to repeat everything. I'll just say that there was a shliach tzibur / chazan at All Nechama. He passed away just this year, but he already moved out from the neighborhood about 10 years ago. His name was Moshe Nordheim, alav shalom. He was the chazan of All Nechama before I even got there, and then he was still there the last year or two or three that I was there, so I did hear him a little bit. And I'm pointing this out because I'm not going to deal with his chazanut, but he davened once in a weekday, and he had maybe a yard side, whatever it was. So you heard him say a chazarat hashatz of a weekday Shmon Esrei. Now sometimes the printer didn't bother putting in commas, assumed that you knew how to punctuate the phrase properly. But there were two brachot that most people most probably get it wrong. It's the end of the bracha of Rifa'enu and the end of the bracha of Tekah b'shofar gadol l'cherotenu. The end of Rifa'enu is Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael. Most people say Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael. You just think about it. That's not correct. It's Cholei Amo Yisrael. The phrase Cholei Amo Yisrael goes together. It's the ill of Am Yisrael. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu that he should send refuah, he should send a remedy to whom? To the Cholei Amo Yisrael. So it should be Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael. I say again, that you listen, anybody who has Chazarat Hashatz, Shachros, or Mincha in a weekday, they're going to say Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael, and it's been we conditioned ourselves, but it's probably not correct. And I heard this from Moshe Nordheim. I said, you know what, the man's right. And the second was with Mikabetz Nitchei Amo Yisrael, but most people will say Mikabetz Nitchei Amo Yisrael. The Nitchei Amo Yisrael goes together. It's the dispersed of Am Yisrael. And we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu that he should ingather, Mikabetz. Who should he ingather? Those who are spread out. Mikabetz, Nitchei Amo Yisrael. So there, the printer never put a comma there. Maybe assumed that you know how to say it. But as it turns out, that most people, I'm talking about 95% of the people, most probably have it wrong, but it's not a terrible thing. I always say with these things, after all these years, Kadosh Baruch Hu just got used to it. Just like he got used to Nusach Ashkenaz, it's also okay. You can also daven Nusach Ashkenaz. We'll forgive you. The Mekabetz Nitchei Amo Yisrael, Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael. With regard to the other things, so let's say V'ishe Yisrael utfilatam ba'avat kabel b'ratzon that we talked about last week. So I mentioned that there's some Siddurim that just didn't want to get there embroiled in a machloket and put the commas both places, and that's really wrong. Either you say V'shevet avodah lidvi betecha V'ishe Yisrael, comma, or V'ishe Yisrael utfilatam, so the comma goes before. So this is a question of the printers and the editors and so on. But it does make a difference. This is not just a trivial matter, especially if the Baalei HaTosafot dealt with this and suggested that there were two different ways to say it, and each way then brings out a different understanding of it. Okay, today I would like to just deal with two psukim that we just read 2 days ago in Parshat BEHAALOTECHA, that the most unusual occurrence in the Chumash. They are surrounded with upside down lettered nuns, and it almost forms like a bracket. Like it's as if to say it's a parenthetical insert. It's either doesn't belong here, but it's been interpolated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling Moshe Rabbeinu, put it here even though this isn't the time and place, or this is the time and place, except that it's coming to teach us something very unique about these two psukim. So the title, HaSefer Ben Shnei Psukim, the book that contains two verses. Now normally if you write a paragraph, you're probably going to have more than two verses in a paragraph. If you're going to write a book, you're certainly going to have more than two sentences in a book. So how can you have a book of two sentences? And yet we will see in a moment that our Chazal said that these two psukim should be regarded as a sefer b'fnei atzmo, as an independent book. That means that we don't have 5 books of the Chumash. Why do we call it Chumash? We call it Chumash because of the number 5, obviously. Breshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim. But we may have 7 books, and that is Breshit, Shmot, Vayikra. And then Bamidbar until Vahi B'Nsoah. That would be the 5th book. The 6th book would be these 2 psukim, Vahi B'Nsoah Aron and Uvnucho Yamar. The 7th book would begin right after Uvnucho Yamar until the end of Bamidbar. And the Devarim would be the next book. So you would have 7 books and not 5 books. Now, nobody thinks in those categories that there are 7 books of the Chumash, because then if it would be 7, it would be called a Shvi'iyah and not a Chumash, right? But so let's not take it all that literally, Sefer B'fnei Atzmo, but nevertheless, if Chazal use that phrase, then it requires that we give some understanding. And why would the Balei HaTfilah, we're talking about the Anshe Knesset Gdolah, who organized the SIDDUR, but most probably this entered, let's say a little bit later, maybe in days of Chazal and days of the Geonim, that when we take out a Sefer Torah, we should have introductory psukim. Why do we say, Vahi B'Nsoah Aron, Vayoma Moshe, Kum Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha, when we take out the Sefer Torah? And when we turn to Sefer Torah, Uvnucho Yamar, Shuv Hashem Ruvot Afei Yisrael. This wasn't just to give the great Chazonim a text so they can, be mitchazein, or as we would say in Yiddish, gorgle, right? Gorgle away a whole piece. And if you have a choir, you're going to be standing on your feet for at least 15, 20 minutes. My wife always bemoans the fact that the Chazanim always pick the sections that you have to stand, for them to go, like in the middle of Hallel and so on. Okay, we'll try to answer those questions. So let's just see in source number 1. These are the 2 psukim. Vahi B'Nsoah Aron v'yoma Moshe, Kum Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. Of course, those who are familiar with the book I put out 3 years ago on the Conversations with the Rav, entitled in Hebrew, Vahi B'Nsoah Aron. Most people know it by the English title, 70 Conversations in Transit. But indeed, Vahi B'Nsoah Aron. So there was a thought that was developed by Rabbi Menachem Genak. It was not his thought. He actually brought the thought from the Rav. Rabbi Menachem Genak is the CEO of OU Kashrus. So we're sitting in the OU building, so it's appropriate that I mention Rabbi Genak's title. And he printed in 1996, that was 3 years after the Rav passed away, a memorial volume of Tradition, which is the journal of Torah for the Rabbinical Council of America. And he printed, in this particular memorial issue, Rabbi Genak published the following, that the Rav once asked a question, in the Beit HaMikdash, the Aron had two bars, 2 poles, and the purpose of the poles was to carry the Aron. Fine, the Levium, the family of Kahat from Shevet Levi, they were the ones who carried the Aron, the Seita to Aron. Fine, we understand that. When it came to Beit HaMikdash, the Aron wasn't going anywhere. It was now in its permanent, final location. I was going to say resting place, but people don't like that phrase. So why didn't they just pull the poles out? And, you don't want to use it for a stickball bat. Okay, so, bury it, put it in Geniza, like Seamus. Why was the pole still there? They had no function any longer. The Aron was not being carried anywhere. So the Rav said that the poles symbolize, he said as follows, the Aron Brit, the Aron itself, was the symbol of every Talmid Chacham, and the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, was the symbol of his Beit Midrash. The poles were the symbol of transportability, the ability to move, motion and movement. The Rav said, Oy vavoy, if a Talmid Chacham parks himself in his Beit Midrash, or as we would call it, his ivory tower, and doesn't move out, and doesn't see what's going on, and doesn't spread Torah, a Talmid Chacham has to be portable, has to be in motion, has to be able to get around. And that's why the poles remain there, to symbolize this, that in theory, the Aron should always be in motion, because the Talmid Chacham should always be in motion. And truth is, the Rav was a Yafeh Doresh Yafeh Mekayem. He was in motion, not only his weekly travels from Boston to New York, because he was a Rav in Boston and a Rosh Yeshiva in New York, but even where he was, and I can just say from the vantage point of New York, on his off day, after his 3-hour shiur on Wednesday, he was also in motion, going to people and whatever meetings and so on. And he had to be taken around. So those of us who had a big schut of driving him around, we were like the Shevet Levi, Laseta to Aaron. We were carrying the Aaron. That's why I called the book Vayhi B'Nesua Aaron, on the basis, because he was our Aaron for us. He was our Aaron Brit. So Yafeh, and I said that too, that it's a Ha'aron and Aharon are the same letters. So it's a little play, and from time immemorial, Rabbanim wrote Svarim trying to incorporate by some allusion their name or family name into the fabric of the name of the book. So that is correct. That's why it's Vayhi B'Nesua Aaron. So Vayhi B'Nesua Aaron V'yom Moshe. So here we're talking about the travels of Am Yisrael in the desert, and but something doesn't make sense. What does it mean? V'yafutzu ayvecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. We will spread the enemies and the adversaries are going to be, thrown away, spread out. Nobody's talking about a war here. We're talking about Am Yisrael traveling in the desert. And then the second pasuk, Uvnucho Yomar, and when the word Noach means to rest, Tenucha, it's resting place. When it will rest, Shuva Hashem Rivavot Alfei Yisrael, to return. Who's returning to whom? And who are the Rivavot Alfei Yisrael? It's an enigmatic two psukim. We don't exactly know what is this referring to. And this led some of the Chachamim to say that whatever it means, it doesn't belong here. It's just out of place and was brought from somewhere else, like if you understand baseball language, out of left field. It was just brought from somewhere else and put here for a reason, and just to indicate that it doesn't belong here. So the tradition has that it's surrounded by these two upside down letter nuns, which form a type of bracket and enclosure of sorts, so to indicate that it really doesn't belong here. So let's see what happens. Rashi in source number 2, Vayhi B'Nesua Aaron, Asei lo simaniyot milfanav ulmeacharav. Make 2 indications before and after. These are the upside down nuns that are in the Sefer Torah before Vayhi B'Nesua and after the pasuk of Nucho Yomar. Lomar, to teach us, she'ein ze mekomo. This doesn't really belong here. It belongs somewhere else. What Rashi doesn't tell us, okay, fine. So where does it belong? We don't know. Rashi at least doesn't tell us. V'lama nichtav kan. Okay, so why is it here? Kedei lafsik ben puranut lepuranut, to divide between one parasha of punishment. Puranut means terrible omens, things going on, bad things going on, to one scene of puranut and another scene, and somehow we're breaking it up, as it says in Perek Kol Kitvei of Masechet Shabbat. So what's enigmatic even further? What are the Puranayot? Which bad scenes are we talking about? And why is there a need to break it up? So in source number 3, Siftei Chachamim. Siftei Chachamim is a type of Perush on Rashi. And there's a whole library out there of people trying to explain Rashi. Because Rashi speaks, which, as I remember hearing from the Chabad Leibowitz, Rashi hardly speaks. Rashi is quoting and editing. 90% of his Rashi on the Chumash is Medrash. So he takes from the world of Medrash, he takes from the Gemara, he takes from this, and he lifts out of context, slices it, condenses it, and says something, and then you're supposed to figure out what he had in mind. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote a whole book on Rashi. The Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote a sefer on trying to understand that what Rashi really is telling us is the pshat of the pasuk. Now, many people say, no. Pshat, the basic understanding. Take a look at Ibn Ezra. Ramban might be closer to pshat. Rashi, Medrash. Rashi's grandson, Rashbam, I don't want to use the word, God forbid, attacks, but he criticizes his grandfather. He says, it's very nice, as we say, it's nechmad, it's geschmack, it's all that, but it's not pshat. And Rashbam goes and challenges his grandfather on many, many understandings of the pasuk, because he says, I'm telling you the pshat. This is what the meaning is. Now, there is a concept called pardes, pshat, remez, drash, and sod. There are different levels or different frequencies of understanding the text. So if you want to say that Rashi is drash, fair game. So it's drash. So drash sometimes is translated homiletical. It's not exactly what the text was all about, but you take off from the text and you develop ideas based on something that's in the text. That's okay, but that's not the basic meaning. We have to understand, okay, what did the Torah mean when it said this? I mean, even take a pasuk, lo tevashel gedi b'chalei v'imo. So what's the pshat? So once I talked about it, it meant that Moshe Rabbeinu was telling them what those pagans were doing by taking goat's meat and cooking it in mother's milk. Don't do that as a fertility rite, R-I-T-E, but do it my way, Reshit bikurei atmatcha tavi bet Hashem lekecha, in all one pasuk. Bring bikurim. That's the pshat. Now comes the drash, but it's drash hilchati. Lo tevashel gedi b'chalei v'imo is your kitchen. It's separating milk and meat and everything that goes along with it. Right? Milchix fleishix. That's what it became. But that's not the pshat of the pasuk. The pshat is one thing, and then there's drash. There are two types of drash. There's drash which is halacha, and there's drash which is agada, which is thought, which is philosophy. Chazal were giving us an idea. I just mentioned this at the tea table. Avraham zakein ba bayamim, Vashem berach et Avraham bakol. Avraham Avinu was old, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu blessed him with everything. So what is everything? So write a composition. What is everything to me? What does it mean? I have everything. So somebody's going to say, I have good health. That's everything else is, secondary. I have a nice family. I have this. I have that. I have wealth. I have all of the above. Whatever it is, everybody's got their definition of bakol. You want to know what bakol means? Keep reading in the Chumash when the Eved Avraham tells Betuel and Lavan that Avraham was old, my master was old, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him A, B, C, D, E, wealth and Gemalim and Chamor, everything. So it's spelled out in the Chumash what the bakol was. But the Medrash goes very interesting. It says bakol, it's a daughter whose name was Bakol. Okay, that's very nice. So I have a cousin who asked a question. He said, if before Matan Torah, Yitzchak could have married this girl Bakol. Well, there was no Avera at the time. So why didn't he want to marry Bakol? Why did the Eved have to go to Chutz La'aretz to dig up Rivka and so on? The answer is that Yitzchak wanted to marry a girl, not a medrash. You have to understand, that says something about your attitude towards medrash. The Rav told us about the Midrash Agadah, these Agadic Midrashim. He said some of them supplement the biblical text. In other words, the Torah tells us the story, but leaves you dangling in the air, and the Medrash fills in the blanks. So you have those Midrashim that actually do fill in the actual story. Some, the Chazal never in a million years thought that this was history, but it was pin the tail on the donkey, pin the idea on the pasuk. They want to say something, and to give this something validity, it now is attached to, as Nechama Leibowitz pointed out, with the Adam Rishon in Gan Eden. I'm sorry, so with not after Adam Rishon, Cain and Hevel, it says they're walking in the field, Vayi be'otam basadeh, Vayomer Cain el Hevel achiv, Cain tells Hevel, and next thing you know, Cain kills Hevel. What did he say to him? Doesn't say. What did he say to him? So, hands up. So the Medrash says three different things. The Medrash says the Cain and Hevel, they were arguing about the world. The world had land, had real estate, and the world had metaltalin, movable objects. So they decided, the two of them, you know what? Let's split. Cain says, I'll take the land, and the metaltalin, and Hevel says, okay, I'll take the land, and that's indicated, that says that Hevel was a roy etzon, and Cain was ofer adama, and Hevel was roy etzon. So Hevel had the movable things, and Cain had the land. It's all nice and dandy. And then Cain tells Hevel, okay, the land is mine. So uf mikan, John, get off my land. And the other one says to the other one, I take off your shirt. It's my shirt, So they fought it out. And Cain decides that if he kills Hevel, then he becomes the master of the land and the movable objects and everything. That's one medrash. The second medrash says, no. They decided to split the globe into two, the northern and southern hemisphere. Then came the question, where would the Beit HaMikdash be built? The northern part or the southern part? So Cain kills Hevel, now he's the master of the north and the south, so he solved the problem. The third was, they thought that Chava was going to be the only woman, and she would live forever. So the question is, after the father Adam dies, who gets Chava as a wife? So they fought it out, and Cain kills Hevel, and now he's the only one around, first in line and only one in line to get Chava. So Nechama says, nobody was there with a tape recorder to see what the discussion was. What's the pshat? The pshat was they were talking about whatever they were talking about. It makes no difference. They're talking about the politics, the weather. They were talking, what we would call small talk. The point was Hevel didn't feel threatened at that moment, that he had to even defend himself. It came out of nowhere. It was a total surprise attack that when Cain kills Hevel. That's what it means. Vayomer Cain al Hevel achiv. They were schmoozing. Next thing you know, he's dead. So that's the pshat. But the Medrash comes to teach us the anatomy of murder. Why do human beings kill? They either kill for money and property, or they kill for religion, or they kill for romantic reasons. They're fighting over a woman. Those are the reasons, and that's what Chazal were doing when they attached these three different discussions to Vayomer Cain al Hevel Yachiv. This is the creative use of Medrash to make a point, a philosophical point. That's very important, but it's not the pshat. It's not the pshat at all. So the question now is, Vayhi ben Aharon, let's get back to what exactly is the pshat? What is this doing here? And ben puranut to proyunut. So Siftei Chachamim, in source number 3, is one of those who came to teach us what Rashi is alluding to, because you really do have to fill in some blanks. And he says as follows, V'im tomar, if you want to say, Bishloma, that is to say, correct, Puranut achrona, we know about the after, the Puranut, the bad omen that happens after these two psukim. Because it says, Vayhi am kimit onanim ra be'enei Hashem. There's a whole turmoil about food. There's a whole turmoil about food, and it ultimately leads to man falling. Man fell already, but here they're complaining about the man. They're complaining about the man. And here too, the difference between Medrash and Pshat. The Torah tells us exactly how the man tasted. And yet there's a famous Medrash that we all grew up on, that the man tasted whatever you had in mind that it should taste. So if it tasted whatever you wanted, so why did they complain? What was the complaint about? So first of all, this says something about the real notion of taste. Taste has to do with combination of vision and smell. If you can take away vision and smell, you can fool a person what he or she is eating. They actually did this as an experiment. They chopped apples and they chopped onions. So in a chopped consistency, they feel very, very similar, very similar. But the taste of an apple and the taste of an onion is going to be very different. And what they did was, they took a person, to different people, they blindfolded them and clipped their nose, and they gave them to eat. And they blindfolded but didn't clip the nose, clipped the nose and didn't blindfold. And those who had some sense of taste or vision were able to detect which one was the apple, which was the onion. But those that were blindfolded and nose clipped completely made a mistake as to which was the apple and which was the onion. And that's not a small thing. It shows that that's why a lot of times if you have a cold and you have a stuffed nose, chaval to eat, I can't taste it anyway. What does the taste have to do with the smell? It has a lot to do with the smell, a lot to do with it. So if you didn't see the ice cream with the cream on it, with the whipped cream and the cherry on top, so what? You're eating mun. It looks bland, And now you're telling me I'm thinking of this great, Carvel ice cream cone with the whipped cream and the cherry and the sprinkles, of course. Don't forget the sprinkles. And you don't see it, you're not going to really taste it. So they felt that what was in their minds? Zacharnu et hadaga shenochal b'Mitzrayim chinam. They remembered the herring. That's what they remembered. The avatiach, the watermelons, and the bitzalim. This they remembered. They don't want this dry stuff. This contradicts the Medrash. Or it could have tasted like that, but they want to see it. They want to look at it. They don't want this stuff and so on. So it was big trouble for Moshe Rabbeinu at the end of, after this Vayhi B'Nesua Aharon, these two psukim. So that we know. That's what the Siftei Chachamim say. But what was the Puranut before? It doesn't talk about a bad scene and so on. So Rashi, that's what Siftei Chachamim says. Ela Puranut Rishona Mahi. What was the bad scene that happened before Vayhi B'Nesua Aharon? Yesh Lamar, we can suggest the following. Dichtiv La'el, it says above, Minei, above these psukim, Vayis'u mehar Hashem. And they traveled from Har Sinai, Har Hashem, the mountain of God. They left Har Hashem. Which means, you have to realize, from Sefer Shmot, Parshat Yitro, when they arrive at the place of Har Sinai, until here in Parshat BEHAALOTECHA, in Sefer Bamidbar, they're still at Har Sinai. The whole Sefer Vayikra, there's no motion, nobody's moving anywhere. And the whole Am Yisrael organizes in the beginning of Parshat Bamidbar and Naso, and that's where the Mishkan is inaugurated, and now they're going to start moving here in Parshat BEHAALOTECHA. Where they're going? Teretz Yisrael. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu tells his father-in-law, no simanachlu, pack up. We're starting to move. This is it. And it says, Vayis'u mehar Hashem, Havale lemeimar, Vayis'u mehar Elokim. This is interesting. Difference of Shem Hashem. It says in the Torah, Vayis'u mehar Hashem. But the Torah called God's presence on Har Sinai, he called the mountain Har Elokim. So there's a change of the name of the mountain here from Har Hashem to Har Elokim. What does that teach us? Ella, kitinok haboreach mi beit hasefer. Perfect for the end of June to read this. It's like children who leave school when the school is shut down, right? You run out of school, whether it happens every day. I remember in the yeshiva in high school in Chashbonaim, with Sfirat HaOmer, the kids would count Sfirat HaGomer, how many days left to the end of the school year, right? Kitiginok haborech b'beit hasefer, v'hu gam kein puranut shesaru me'Hashem. What does that mean? They ran away from Har Sinai. All right, let's get out of here. Like it's time to roll. They were like pretty happy. They were enough from Har Sinai. Let's move. That caused that rushing away from Har Sinai. They should have said, we have to leave. It's like sometimes, you're leaving, you're visiting a country that you really enjoyed that trip, and you're at the airport, and you're leaving. It's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said about Shmini Atzeret. Kasha alai predatchem. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't want you to leave. Stick around for one more day, and so on. Am Yisrael should have had a feeling of, can we stay another day? No. They packed themselves up and rushed out of Har Sinai area, which basically caused a little bit of a breakdown, and that's why they faltered. They faltered already. So that's the first Puranut, although it doesn't spell it out in the Chumash, but that would be the Puranut before. Okay? So now we still don't know why these two psukim are there, to break up these two sections of the Puranut. So let's look at source number 4. Source number 4 is the Gemara Masechet Shabbat that says, the Braita, Tanu Rabbanan, Vayhi B'Nesua Aharon, Vayomer Moshe. Parsha zu, asa lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu simaniyot milamala ulemata. This parsha, the tradition has indications, signs, before and after. These are the upside down letter Nun. Lomar, to teach us. She'ein ze mekoma. Now this is, you see where Rashi got it from. Rashi simply quoted from this Gemara. This isn't the place. Rabbi Omer, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, Lo min Hashem hu zeh. Now, I would never say that this isn't the place. It's quite the contrary. This is the place, but ele mipnei shesefer chashuv hu b'fnei atzmo. It is to be regarded as an independent book. So let's be careful. Regarded. Notice, it's not really another book. It's part of Bamidbar. There's a before and after. But on some level, we could regard these two psukim as an independent book. And if that's the case, then it has to tell a story. A book tells a story, whether the book has 600 pages or the book has 2 verses or 2 sentences. It's got to tell a story. And the story is going to give us to understand what's it doing here in the middle of Parshat BEHAALOTECHA. So just as one hint, before the Vayhi ben Aharon, everybody's packing up. And that's when Moshe tells his father-in-law, no Siman, we're moving. And that's when the Chatzotzrot, source number 5. Vadaber Hashem Moshe lemor, aseh lecha shtei Chatzotzrot kesef, make 2 silver trumpets, miksha ta'aseh otam, vayu lecha lemikra ha'ida ulemasat ha'machanot. You're going to need this as a siren, a bullhorn, to get people to start rolling. That's what it's for. And then the Torah says, v'chitavo milchama, you're going to use these trumpets on different occasions, not only for the transportation to inform Am Yisrael we are now starting to roll, but if there's going to be a war, so you'll use these trumpets also as a type of signal to bring people to contemplate for tefillah and so on. Any other type of difficulty or calamity, you will sound off these trumpets. Notice the verb is hareotem, which means a trua. What is a trua? It's a waving sound. It's a waving sound. You know, it's almost like the that's a trua. And v'yom simchatchem v'moadechem v'roshei chodshechem on Yom Tov and on Rosh Chodesh, when you bring the special korbanot for those days, utkatem b'chatzotzrot, you'll also use the trumpets, but there it's a tkiya. A tkiya is a straight sound. Now we use this today when the Pikuda Oref sounds a siren. They should go into the miklat, into the shelters. So it's a waving sound. An all clear sound is a straight sound. If there's an all clear sound, that means you can go out if they use it, and so on. So tkiya means a happy sound. A trua means a moment of crisis. This is how Chazal understood that Rosh Hashanah is Yom Hadin, Day of Judgment. Because Rosh Hashanah is defined as Yom Teruah Yeh Lachem. It's a moment of crisis. And what could be the great crisis? Mi yichyeh, mi yamut. Yeah.
How come we don't blow the shofar on these occasions?
Because this is a mitzvah just for Beit HaMikdash. That's why. It's a mitzvah. It's a good question. It's a mitzvah just for Beit HaMikdash. And in Beit HaMikdash, with these trumpets, they also sounded out a shofar. And on Rosh Hashanah, in Beit HaMikdash, with the shofar, they also sounded the trumpets. But the Mishnah tells us, on these occasions that the Torah talks about using the trumpets, the shofar was second fiddle. And on Rosh Hashanah, where shofar was the main mitzvah, the second trumpet, not second fiddle. Right. Good. And on Rosh Hashanah, where the shofar was the main instrument, so the chatzotzrot were the secondary instruments there. The Mishnah says, shofar ma'arich, they kept the shofar sound longer than the chatzotzrot, the trumpets, to show you that the real mitzvah on Rosh Hashanah is the shofar, and on the other occasions, the real mitzvah was the chatzotzrot. Why have both on all occasions? That's a pasuk in Tehillim. B'chatzotzrot v'kol shofar hariyu lifnei hamelech Hashem. Hamelech Hashem. Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there in all his glory, and that is when Beit HaMikdash is up and running, so we have both chatzotzrot and shofarot. But we don't have the chatzotzrot at all, and we do have shofar, because shofar is a mitzvah outside the Beit HaMikdash as well. And so the purpose of the chatzotzrot in the desert was to organize the movement. Fine, okay. So that's like very important. And then the next psukim, Vayi b'shana shenit, the second year after Yetziat Mitzrayim, b'chodesh hasheni, in the month of Iyar, b'esrim l'chodesh, the 20th of Iyar, na'ala ha'anan. Finally, the pillar, the anan, the amud anan, started moving from the top of the Mishkan. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael l'masenem midbar Sinai. They started rolling. Vayishkon ha'anan b'midbar Paran. In midbar Paran, that's where it took its first station. Vayisu barishana pi Hashem bi'ad Moshe. And this whole transportation started. And then later on in the parasha it says, Eile masei b'nei Yisrael l'tzivotam vayiso. That's Parshat Masei. You get the whole schedule. Vayisu vayachanu, vayisu vayachanu, vayisu vayachanu. They traveled, they rested, they traveled, they rested over 40 times. Fine. So you have all these travelings in the Midbar. And then in the next section is when Moshe tells his father, Chovav, who Yitro had 7 names. Chovav ben Ruel Midyani, Choten Moshe, Nosim anachnu, we are going. And the question then is, and it's still unanswered till this very day, does Yitro come along or does he go back home? We're not sure. We're not sure. It's like the Shaliach Aliyah, who thought he had the potential Oleh in the pocket, and then you're not sure if he shows up in Israel or not. That's the other one. Right. That happened too. Right. I don't have to tell you guys. It was good work. They were good at it. Right. And then in source number 6, here comes the pasuk after Va'uvnocha Yomar, Vahi am kimitonanim Rabbi ene Hashem, Vayishma Hashem, Vayichar po Kadosh Baruch Hu was angry, Vativarbam eish Hashem, Vatochal b'ktzeh machaneh. There was a big wipe out there. The next source on 7 is Rashi on this pasuk, Vahi am kimitonanim, Ein ha'am el rishaim. They were wicked, they were bad, and it was really a bad scene that happens right then and there. But look at the last line of source 7. It says, Vayichar apo, Kadosh Baruch Hu got angry. Ani hayiti mitkaven litovatchem shetikansu la'aretz miyad. My original plan was, you're going into Eretz Yisrael now. But that was aborted, and you didn't even have to wait till the Meraglim until it became a 40-year stretch. Even at this point already, in Parshat BEHAALOTECHA, all right, it's not happening tomorrow. It's going to be a little bit of a, in Yiddish we say a dreyarum, just a little circling around. I mean, eventually, because of the Meraglim, it becomes a 40-year journey in the Midbar. I mean, I saw several years ago, I got, these funny WhatsApps. You see Moshe Rabbeinu holding up his phone, his Waze, and it says, Arba'im Shana? Like, you usually get on the Waze, on how long it's going to take you to get there. 40 years? Right. So now let's get into the Vahi B'Nesua and Uvnucho Yomar and try to understand what this is all about. Our Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik proposed the following. These 2 psukim are teaching us about 2 eras in Beit HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael. So we know that we were in Eretz Yisrael for approximately 1,000 years. Approximately. The Ramban in Breshit tells us on the last pasuk of the creation, Vayvarach Elokim et Yom HaShivi vaykadesh oto, ki vo shavat mikol melachto, asher bara Elokim la'asot. So what's la'asot? Means be proactive. La'asot, to do something. So Ramban says la'asot is the scheme of 6,000 years of history. And each millennium reflects a day of creation. And then he plots it out from the beginning, and he says that day 1 of creation was the creation of light. That's all it was, Yi Or. And he says the Or was Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon lives 930 years. He could have lived 1,000 years, 70 years, according to the Medrash, was taken off for David HaMelech, but even if he only lived till 930, you can round it out. The first millennium is Adam Rishon, and he's the light of the millennium. There are generations, 10 generations, till Noach. And then comes Noach. Noach lives also. He lives longer than Adam. He lives 950 years, as the Torah records. He's the second millennium. And what happens in the creation of the second day? First of all, there's no Kitov. And Ramban says there's no Kitov because it was a terrible calamity for the world. The world was fundamentally destroyed and it had to start all over again with Noach. So that's not good. So there was nothing good about it. It had to be done. It was like you have an operation and they have to amputate. It's not great, but all right. But we continue. At least you can continue living with this. Beseda. And it was this. You have Noach, who's in the teva, on top of the waters, and then the others are under the water. What happens on the creation of the second day of the creation? It's the separation of the waters. Me'ala rakia, mitachad rakia, and that rakia is like the teva of Noach, symbolically. So the second millennium is Noach, says the Ramban. The third millennium is Tache ha'aretz desha, sprouting, something sprouting, and that's Avram Avinu on the scene. This is the beginning of what's going to become Am Yisrael. And he counts. He says from Avram Avinu until Yetziat Mitzrayim was 430 years. That we have that. And then there was 40 years, and then until we got into Eretz Yisrael, the Ger Yezarcha Beretz Lo Lahem, Va'avadum Vinu Otam 400 Shana. So from Avram Avinu until Yetziat Mitzrayim, and until they built the first Beit HaMikdash. So first Beit HaMikdash was built 480 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim. So that's 1,000 years too. It's about 1,000 years from Avram Avinu until the building of the first Beit HaMikdash. So that's the third millennium. The fourth millennium is the sun and the moon, the celestial bodies. That's the first Beit HaMikdash and the second Beit HaMikdash. So there's 410 years, there's 70 years in the interim, there's another 420 years, and let's say carry it till the Bar Kokhba revolution, that's a millennium. So the fourth millennium is the sun, which is the first Beit HaMikdash, which was in a greater standing than the second. The second was the moon, it was a lower standing, and so on. But that was really the fourth millennium. The fifth millennium is what we call in history the period of the barbarians. The barbarians, well, that was the animals were created on the fifth day. So mankind became man-animal. That's the barbarians. And then there's Ramban, and he's in the 13th century, and he says, I'm beginning the sixth millennium. And who's the sixth millennium? Man, Adam Rishon. And that's going to end with the seventh millennium, which is Mashiach. That's the Shabbat. Shabbat, Yom Shekulo Shabbat, Umnucha L'chayei Olamim. But the Ramban, who's living in the 13th century, he doesn't want to wait around to the 21st century. So, he says that he pulls out an interesting halakha that miktzat hayom kekulo, that the last day, just the beginning of the day can count as the full day. Like Shalom Nidam Mitzarot, the person gets up from Shiva in the morning, because the seventh day, okay, you sat a little bit in the seventh day, that's enough. You don't have to go through the whole day. The Ramban says you don't have to go through the whole the whole sixth millennium. You can get there on the express track. And the Ramban was very hopeful that he would live to see the Mashiach time, right? Beseda, but he plots this out. So this all has to do with the Vayhi ben Sa'aron, Vayoma Moshe, Uvnucho Yomar. The Rav said this has to do with those 1,000 years of the Beit HaMikdash era. And there are two different parts to it. First Beit HaMikdash era, second Beit HaMikdash era. There's a world of a difference between the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael and its relationship to Beit HaMikdash, between Bayit Rishon and Bayit Sheni. A world of a difference. And they are symbolized by these two psukim. What Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching Am Yisrael at this juncture, in the middle of Parshat BEHAALOTECHA, where he says, Nos'im anachnu, we are moving towards Eretz Yisrael. Not only was Har Sinai not the end game, but also the entry into Eretz Yisrael is not the end game. The end game of the Geula, of the Galut to Geula process is Beit HaMikdash. And you can prove it with two things. First of all, there's the Pasuk in Melachim Aleph, which is the Haftarah for Parshat Truma. And it says there, Vayhi b'shmonim shana v'arba me'ot shana l'tzeit b'nei Yisrael mi'Mitzrayim. Why is the beginning of the building of Bayit Rishon and days of Shlomo HaMelech given in terms of the dating of Yetziat Mitzrayim, if not to teach us this is the end game? This is the culmination of Yetziat Mitzrayim. It took a long time, 480 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim, but here we are. But you know which poet said it so beautifully? Dayenu, dayenu. How does it begin? Ilu otzanu mitzrayim v'lo asem shvatim dayenu. Ilu, dayenu. And then it brings us all the way up to Binyan Beit HaBchira L'chaper Al Avonotenu. The Dayenu song ends with the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And that happens, and it says there, Beit HaBchira. Do you remember the Dayenu story? Because after you finish Dayenu, then you go back. Alachat kama chama tova kfula muchupelet, that he did this and that and this and that. Shotzian Mitzrayim v'asem mishvatim v'asem, and you get there. V'chnisanu l'eretz Yisrael ubana lanu Beit HaBchira l'chaper al avonotenu. Why is it called Beit HaBchira? So okay, why didn't it call Beit HaMikdash? So the Rav explained once that the Rambam talks about the building of Beit HaMikdash twice. Once in the laws of building Beit HaMikdash, that's a good place to talk about it. And the other is in Hilchot Melachim, where he talks about 3 mitzvot that were given to Am Yisrael as a nation. And one was to appoint a king, one was to eradicate Amalek, and one was to build the Beit HaMikdash. Okay? With regard to the mitzvah of building Beit HaMikdash, the Rambam cites Parshat Truma, Ve'asu li mikdash v'shechanti b'tocham. When he talks about the 3 mitzvot that Am Yisrael must perform, and they include the appointment of a king, the eradication of Amalek, and building Beit HaMikdash, he cites a different pasuk from Parshat Re'eh, L'shichno tidrishu uvat hashama. You should seek out the place and go there and build Beit HaMikdash. Parshat Re'eh. And some of the commentators and Rambam are baffled why the Rambam is talking about the same thing. He brings 2 different pasukim. But to the Rav's mind, that means the Rambam is talking about 2 different things. In the first place, he's talking about the building of a house, a structure that will be used for sacrificial activity and will be the focal point for Aliyah L'Regel. Well, every time they put up the Mishkan in the desert, they fulfilled the mitzvah again, Ve'asu Mikdash. It's called Mikdash. We call it Mishkan. But it's a Mikdash in Parshat Truma. Ve'asu Mikdash. Every single time. It was like Legos. You took it apart, you put it back together. Took it apart, put it back together. Vayesu Vayachanu. Vayesu Vayachanu. Every Vayachanu, they put it up. In Shiloh, they put up the Mishkan. So, and then later they put up a Beit HaMikdash. These are all Mikdash. But there's a special halacha that when the Mikdash gets to Yerushalayim, it's not moving anywhere else. This is its final address and location. And it's the place that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will choose, as the Torah says in Parshat Re'eh, Ela makom asher yivchar Hashem l'shaken shmo sham. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will choose. But not only will he choose, but he wants you to figure it out. That's the pasuk, l'shichno tidrishu vatashama. Seek it out. And indeed, David HaMelech, not Shlomo, David HaMelech, with a Navi, locate the place where Beit HaMikdash should be. And from then on, it was called Beit HaBechira. So that starts with Shlomo HaMelech, as opposed to the Mishkan of Shiloh, as opposed to the Mishkan that was in different locations in Eretz Yisrael, and in the Midbar, in the desert. In Yerushalayim, it's now the chosen place, Beit HaBechira. And here you have 2 different modes of how Am Yisrael is going to sanctify the land. Because the land was not sanctified in the days of Avraham Avinu. In the days of Avraham Avinu, the land was assured and promised to Avraham Avinu's family. But it's sanctified in the days of Yeshua. How does that happen? With conquest. Or to use the halachic term, kibush. The conquest. Fine. And the Rambam tells us that when the Babylonians captured Eretz Yisrael, they undid the conquest of Yeshua all the way until David HaMelech's day, and that's why Eretz Yisrael lost its Kedusha. But in Beit Sheni, we didn't conquer. We were given a license by the Persians to come back and build the Beit HaMikdash. And you didn't have to fight for it. And about 5% was Zionist and came. 95% stayed in America. They called America Persia then, Bavel. They had a different name to it, that's all. But as Rabbi Yehuda Levi said in the Kuzari 900 years ago, they had their homes, they had their fields, they had their occupations, and the grandparents were refugees, And here, we made it. We're 3rd-generation Americans. We made it, right? Grandparents, they had to work hard. Came from Ellis Island, and they had to work hard. Some couldn't even keep Shabbat to make a living, and so on. Now, Baruch Hashem, we're Shem Shabbos, and so on. We don't eat by our grandparents anymore, thank God, because we're such tzaddikim. And the And Rabbi Yehuda Levi lashes out of that generation because the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of this not coming to Eretz Yisrael in the second Beit HaMikdash era. But the sanctification of the land was not kibush, was not conquering, but was settlement. Settlement. And the Rambam tells us, because it was settlement, and we never forfeited our rights to Eretz Yisrael, not only in theory, but there was always a Jewish presence of at least 10 Jews in Eretz Yisrael at any given era from the days of the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. We never lost title. The Rambam believes, had there been an era of Eretz Yisrael in the last 1900 years without at least a minion of Jews in Eretz Yisrael, then that would have been considered the eradication of Am Yisrael. That would have been considered, even if you have 25 million Jews in the world. If you don't have a minion of Jews in Eretz Yisrael, there's no more Klal Yisrael. That's it, finished. And that never happened. And therefore, the Rav said as follows, to understand this. The first pasuk, Vayhi B'Soah, talks about the first mode of sanctifying Eretz Yisrael. The Aron Brit went along with the warriors. We know this. There was a time that the Aron Brit was even taken captive by the Pelishtim. So the Aron went with Am Yisrael. Vayhi B'Soah Aron, Vayom Moshe, Kuma Hashem, V'yafutzu Oivecha, V'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. It will disperse the enemy. This will be at your side. The Aron Brit means HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with you in battle. And that's how you're going to, stage by stage, conquer the land of Eretz Yisrael, and each stage will be sanctified after the next stage. That was the first pasuk. It talked about how Eretz Yisrael will be sanctified in Beit Rishon. Whereas the second Beit HaMikdash era was very different. It was Uvnucho Yomar. Everything now is stationary. Now it's interesting that in Beit Sheni, we didn't even have an Aron Brit. Where was the Aron? So there's a tradition that it's actually deep down on Har HaBayit. It's stationary. It's there. It's not going anywhere. Uvnucho Yomar. Shuva Hashem Rivavot Alfei Yisrael. The call to return to Eretz Yisrael was the call for Beit Sheni. So you have now a completely different mode of how Eretz Yisrael was going to be sanctified. And because they are different modes, the question is, what happened after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash and the Galut, the exile, and the second? Well, after the first, the Kedusha dissipated, was abandoned, because the Babylonians conquered. And they conquered the land. They undid our conquering, so there's no longer sanctification of the land. But if we never really left Eretz Yisrael in terms of residing in Eretz Yisrael, and you don't need more than 1 million of Jews to do that, we never forfeited our yityashvut, our hitnachalut, our chazaka, to use the halakhic language, and therefore Eretz Yisrael remains sanctified until this very day. Until this very day. Rav Goren wrote about this after the 56 war. Is there a need to re-sanctify parts of Eretz Yisrael? I mean, the truth of the matter is, I just gave you broadly the Rambam's point of view, which is the accepted point of view in Halakha today, that those areas that we came back to in the days of Beit Sheni remain sanctified till this very day. Those areas of Eretz Yisrael that we did not come back to in Beit Sheni, it might be part of the state of Israel today, but they are not sanctified from that original sanctification. So we know, we have a pretty good idea of what that map looks like. So in those areas, there is less of an issue of Shemitah, less of an issue of Trumot and Masrot. And for example, the entire Arava, from the Dead Sea area, the hotel area, go down all the way south to Eilat. So there are a lot of kibbutzim there that grow a lot of stuff that we eat. So in the Shemitah year, if you don't want to buy Arab produce, you want Israeli produce, but also you don't want to rely on what's called the Heter Mechira, it's the best option. That, or what was once upon a time the Gush Katif option, because the Mishnah tells us that Ashkelon was the southern border of Eretz Yisrael in the days of Beit Sheni, which means the Gush Katif area, which is the area of Gaza, was out of the pale. Now, if you lived there, did you fulfill the mitzvah of residing in Eretz Yisrael? The answer is categorically yes, because the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael is not contingent on the land being sanctified, but it's contingent on the map that was given to Avram Avinu, the promised land. And there it goes all the way to Nahar Mitzrayim, Minahar Prat to Minachal Mitzrayim until Nahar Prat. So where is Nachal Mitzrayim? So that's a machloket, whether it's the Wadi El Arish, which cuts the Sinai Peninsula in half, or it's the Nile River. That's pretty deep, that's into Egypt already. Rashi believes it was the Nilus, but Rav Sadia Gaon believed that it was the Wadi El Arish, but certainly takes into consideration the entire Negev of the modern state of Israel, all the way down to Eilat. Yeah.
What I don't understand is that after the second temple, the country was also conquered.
Right, but it had nothing to do with the conquering. The conquering is an irrelevant factor in Beit Sheni. That's not what sanctified the land. Because it had to do with Hitashvut, Chazakah, of settling, and the settlement never was relinquished. Even though it was in very, very small numbers, the Rambam says, I don't care how small the numbers, as long as you got a minion there, and the Rambam believes that it was assured to us that it would never happen. The Kadosh Baruch Hu promised us that Am Yisrael would never be extinguished. And if you wouldn't have a minion of Jews in Eretz Yisrael, that's called the extinction of Am Yisrael. And it was promised us. I'll tell you where he says it. It's in the Sefer HaMitzvot of the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. He says, hypothetically, if there wouldn't be a million of Jews in Eretz Yisrael, then the calendar today would have no halachic value, and there would be no Pesach, no Shavuot, no Rosh Hashanah, no Yom Kippur, no Sukkot, no nothing. Nothing. But he says, before he even goes on to say his point, he says, Chalila lakel me'asot davar kazeh. No, God forbid, it'll never happen. Kadosh Baruch Hu promised it'll never happen. But purely theoretical, if something like that would happen, Rambam postulates the calendar would be obliterated, and there would be no sanctity at all to the Yomim Tovim. So therefore, who sanctifies the Yom Tov today? There's a big novel idea of the Rambam. We do, by being here, and that gives halachic energy to the printed calendar that you received Erev Rosh Hashanah from the organizations with a donation envelope, right? You most probably got 50,000 calendars with envelopes, right? And that's how you know that it was Rosh Chodesh. But the Rambam says what makes the calendar into something that's valid is that there are at least 10 Jews in Eretz Yisrael. I try my best. It doesn't always work out, but I try my best to if I'm traveling abroad, not to be out of the country for Rosh Chodesh. Because Rosh Chodesh, you want to be here and be a participant. Rambam will be very proud that we have more than 10 Jews here in Eretz Yisrael. We have over 6 million Jews here in Eretz Yisrael observing the day. Maybe not everybody is observing the day as Rosh Chodesh, but at least we're trying to do it. We didn't read all the sources on the second page, 8, 9, and 10, where the Rambam brought out his idea, but the Rav understood these two psukim of Parashat BEHAALOTECHA as being the Sefer B'fnei Atzmo. That is the independent book that's telling us the story, the future story of what the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael is going to be all about, as a sneak preview for Am Yisrael beginning the trek into Eretz Yisrael. And just try to answer the last question. So why do we say these psukim when we take out the Sefer Torah and put it back to Sefer Torah? Vihi B'nesua Aaron Vayom Moshe. Why do we do that? And why do we say V'vnucho Yomar? So on the one hand, because the Sefer Torah is going to be in transit. When you take it out of the Aron, it's now going to be moving. It's Bnesua Ha'aron. And this symbolizes the Torah, Kadosh Baruch Hu, is meeting up now with Am Yisrael. When the Sefer Torah is sitting in the Aron Kodesh, and in some shuls it's just closed, in some shuls it's locked, and some shuls it's locked with a gate and safe and alarm system and whatnot. Unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say that some of the great thieves of Sifrei Torah are Jews who understand the monetary value of it, and they had to come up with a alarm system that's going to be functional on Shabbat as well, because the Ganovim are also smart, and they know that the best time to steal a Sefer Torah is on Friday night, when the shul might not use the alarm system. Ad kedei kach. So here, that Sefer Torah is like behind bars. But Vihi B'nesua Aaron, when you take the Sefer Torah out to be read, what you're basically showing is that Kadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael are meeting. there's a rendezvous. And the Rav always said that the two brachot for the Aliyah, for the first one is for learning. Rasha Barabana we say every morning. The last bracha, Shenatan Lanu Torat Emet, is Har Sinai. It's the reenactment of Ma'amad Har Sinai. So it's the motion of Torah. And I'll teach you an interesting halacha. You don't have to stand up when they open the Aron Kodesh Shul. You have to stand up when the Torah stand up. I even saw Aron because they're going to take the Sefer Torah out. Now this happens on Yom Neroim where they open the Aron, close the Aron, and we all stand up. And I'm not telling you not to do it, but at least for Nila, where the Aron Kodesh is open the whole time, many rabbis get up and say, by the way, if you're not feeling well, sit down. Because you really don't have to stand up. The Sefer Torah is not in motion, there's no chiyuv. But when it is in motion, you have to stand. And you know when there's a real problem? On Simchat Torah, where they're dancing with the Sefer Torah, and people are sitting. That's not allowed. That's why the Rav had the Sefer Torah on the table during Hakafot. And the dancing was around the table of the Sefer Torah, and not people holding the Sefer Torah. Because if you're holding the Sefer Torah, you actually have to be standing. Okay? So this is of Nucho Yomar. Nucho Yomar is when you put the Sefer Torah back, so it's Tnucha. Now it's been resting and gives a signal. Now you can sit down and listen to the rabbis talk. Okay, Bakasha. Rabbi Sam wants to say an announcement here. Bakasha.